Hey everyone, tonight as promised, I wanted to talk about why I couldn't justify keeping my car, or why I let go. For a while I was thinking about getting an EV, or like one day, right? They're extremely expensive. But then I was writing a brief series of articles about Tesla and EVs for counterpunch.org and for the Studio for the Art of Animal Liberation. And during that time that I was studying and writing about electric cars and Elon Musk, my thinking on this changed. Cars, road-making sprawl, all of these accelerate the climate crisis, and yet we keep thinking we should have more cars. Metals, minerals, mining, its toxicity and human rights violations, and desecrating land that's sacred to indigenous people. Is that okay when it's to get lithium to make EV batteries? Ultimately, is any of what our economy does responsive to reality by filling SUVs with gasoline, ripping out forests for grazing, and feed companies? We're just creating and continuing killer weather events. Paving over nature for electric vehicles, that's the status quo with an electric plug. We need reversal at a deep civilization-changing level. And it's going to be something that's forced on us if we shirk our responsibility to listen to nature, to learn from nature. Earth can't handle us anymore. And all of evolution is a bigger deal than human civilization, which depends on and yet constantly sabotages Earth's delicate web of life. And we don't hear as much about extinction because the climate crisis now is crowding that out, but the extinction crisis is a parallel crisis, and climate crisis is just compounding it. I learned about the Hudsonian godwits. These are Sandpipers, a group of sandpipers named after the Hudson Bay where they were first identified. They fly up to Canada or the Alaskan bogs every year. And when they get up to Canada, they set up camp. Or again, in Alaska, they set up camp after having flown the longest leg of their journey all the way from Chile. It's 6,000 miles. 6,000 miles without stopping, without drinking, without eating. They do it at once, all at once, and then they get there. And then the point is, oh, by the way, they're record-breaking migrants. The U.S. Geological Survey shows that they discovered last year, 2022 in November, they published that a 4-month-old godwit known as B6 set a new world record. A non-stop 11-day migration of 8,425 miles, this one from Alaska to Tasmania, Australia. The longest documented non-stop flight by any animal. When they get to the northern beaches after their long flights, their calls on the beach fill the air with beautiful sounds. Now here's the thing. Winter is changing to summer more quickly because of climate crisis. So when they're up in around the Alaskan bogs, or they're up in Canada, there's this little strip of spring that they have to time their arrival for, because that is when these little snails and so forth are on the beach. If it gets too hot too quickly, they're gone. And that is what newly hatched godwits eat. So if the food's not there, coming all the way 6,000 miles to go and to lay their eggs on the beach is in vain, because the hatchlings can't survive. As it is, they have usually 4 eggs, and one of those birds will make it. But now biologists are worried that their mortality rate is going to get much higher, and also that many migratory birds around the world are in this same situation. Vulnerable humans too, like shorebirds, they can't just escape the consequences of the daily actions of affluent people. And it was the godwits that really did it for me. I just said, I cannot justify driving any more. And then there are the immediate physical impacts of driving on animals. That driving has on animals. Driving on animals, that's what happens. Drivers aren't looking even for humans walking and crossing the street, let alone deer, foxes, chipmunks, or toads. The toads called common toads, they migrate twice a year, and 90% of their cars are the most dangerous phenomenon for amphibians around the world. And amphibians are around the world in great danger. And cars are the main reason for it at this point, on top of everything else they're going through with climate and development and everything else. Common toads, if there are more than 60 cars passing on a road in an hour, 90% or more won't make it on those roads. And they need them to get back and forth from their wintering and summer habitats. So look at what we have become in our late stage of self-domestication. We happily confine ourselves in these containers made of metal and glass, believing they bring us freedom. This is Chris, the cat. Well, that was Chris's tail. And so for some reason, we think that it brings us freedom to do things that have nothing to do with what evolution would have us do. We're primates. We're primates. And we stick ourselves in boxes of metal and glass and leave microplastics all over the earth. It's no sign of freedom to forget what we've evolved to do. Before cars, the word pedestrian meant people who weren't equestrians. And equestrians, of course, were people who sat on the back of purpose-bred horses. The abolitionist Quaker Benjamin Lay wouldn't get on a horse. Lay was a deliberate pedestrian, a conscientious objector to human supremacy over the beings whose evolution we broke. I think Benjamin Lay today would resist driving. A car would contradict Lay's commitment to simplicity and everything that simplicity ultimately serves to respect. It would be a testimony to taking Earth and its habitat seriously. Walking, being a committed pedestrian. Everyday driving is action. It's action that bolsters ExxonMobil, Shell, and BP. can we keep handing money to climate-wrecking industries and somehow evade responsibility for the harm they do? I'm no longer accepting the assumption that I'm doing the most important thing for the climate by being a vegan, so that's all I need to do. Let me face myself and my own hesitance to give up my car. And veganism tells me exactly how to do that. You know, early on in my vegan journey, I was tempted, after my mother passed on, to buy a particular cheese that my mother used to share with me. I was in such grief that I was just not able to think. And I had been a vegan for a few years at this point, but I had a problem, a temptation problem. And a vegan I know said, if you're tempted by cheese, go into the grocery store, go into the dairy aisle, and stand there in front of that cheese and imagine the calf who's seeing the first or fourth calf being dragged away. Imagine that cow and imagine that calf forcibly being parted, and say right in the middle of the dairy aisle, preferably aloud, "Fuck you, calf." And then if you can do that, then pick up the cheese. Well, I stood in the dairy case, but I couldn't say that. And so I walked away, and I never went back and looked at the cheese again. And so I was looking at the pump that I'm about to unlatch, right, and put into my car. And I'm thinking, with what climate has done to those sandpipers, I'm thinking to unlatch that pump and to fill up my car was basically the same thing as saying, "F you, sandpiper." And I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm thankful that I couldn't do it anymore. That's why I'm a committed pedestrian, and that's how I made that decision. So thanks for listening.